shadows of the past don't always stay quiet. Decades after a legacy was stolen, a young woman's return to her family's land set off a chain of revelations that neither time nor fire could silence. What she uncovered would rewrite everything the world believed about beauty power and who gets to be remembered. If stories like this move, you hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. I want to know who still believes truth can survive the flames. In a fading autumn light, 12-year-old Grace Whitmore, a young black girl with skin the color of polished walnut and eyes wide with both fear and curiosity, sat on the edge of the sagging porch of her foster home, clutching a cream-colored envelope that seemed far too elegant for a child like her. The letter had traveled across 3 states and several hands to reach her, someone who had long believed the world had forgotten her name. The Harper's house behind her buzzed with the sound of the evening news, but Grace barely noticed. Her fingers traced the words written in ink across the front, Miss Grace Whitmore. It was the first time in years someone had written her full name as if it mattered. The foster system had erased it line by line, each new home calling her simply the girl, the quiet one, or the ward. But this envelope, thick and official, carried something she hadn't dared believe in for so long: belonging. She inhaled sharply before breaking the seal. Inside lay a folded letter, its edges faintly yellowed, and a single sheet of legal parchment with a notary stamp. Her heart pounded as she read, "We are pleased to inform you that you are the sole heir to the property formerly owned by Elias and Eleanor Whitmore, located in Maple Hollow County, Virginia." The rest of the letter spoke of taxes, trust funds, and probate law things she didn't fully understand. But one phrase stood out like a spark in darkness: "The land now belongs to you." For a moment, she simply stared at the page, her breath shallow. She had never owned anything in her life, not even the secondhand shoes she wore. Everything had always been borrowed, temporary. But this was real. Grace, Mrs. Harper's sharp voice cut through her wonder. "Dinner's getting cold." Grace folded the letter quickly and slipped it into her pocket. Dinner was always lukewarm box macaroni eaten in silence, followed by Mr. Harper's complaints about bills. They weren't cruel people, just indifferent people who did the minimum for the monthly stipend. As she chewed, the sound of rain against the window brought her back to another memory, her mother's voice humming an old lullaby in a soft southern drawl, one that always ended with the words, "Home is where your name remembers you." But home had been gone since that night 5 years ago, when a rain-slick road and a flash of headlights had taken her parents away forever. The state said it was an accident. Grace sometimes wondered if it was fate. That night, long after the Harpers fell asleep, Grace sat under her thin blanket flashlight, flickering over the letter's words. The name Whitmore looked strange yet powerful in print. She whispered it aloud until the sound no longer felt foreign. Grace Whitmore. It felt like something worth keeping. She unfolded the second document, an official deed transfer bearing a raised seal. The property's address read 1199 County Route 6, Maple Hollow. She didn't know where that was, but the name carried a rhythm that made her chest tighten with longing. The letter said the land had belonged to her great-grandparents, Elias and Eleanor Whitmore, names her mother had never mentioned. Grace tried to picture them, 2 faces carved from history, people who'd owned something that lasted when so much of her life had not. The next morning at school, she carried the letter everywhere, tucked inside the back of her worn notebook. At lunch, she sat beside Mrs. Harlow, the elderly volunteer who always noticed the quiet kids. "You've been staring at that notebook like it's going to start talking, Mrs." Harlow said, her gray eyes kind and knowing. Grace hesitated before showing her the letter. The woman adjusted her bifocals and her expression softened. "Whitmore," she murmured. "That's a good name. Your great-grandparents lived out by the Mountain Ridge Maple Hollow. I remember hearing stories about that farm. Beautiful land, rich soil. They were good people, hard-working folks. Then one day, they were just gone." She looked up at Grace. "Child, do you know what this means?" Grace shook her head. "It means the world's been waiting for you to come back." The words caught in Grace's throat. No one had ever said anything like that to her. She swallowed hard. "But I can't go. I don't even have a way." Mrs. Harlow smiled faintly. "My old Buick still runs. Maybe it's time for a little road trip." Grace blinked, unsure if the woman was serious, but there was something in her tone, a promise, maybe even fate. That night, Grace returned to the porch, the same letter now slightly smudged from her fingerprints. The evening air smelled of wet earth and rust. Above her, clouds drifted apart, revealing a slice of moonlight. She imagined Maple Hollow, a place hidden in the folds of the mountains, where maybe the air still carried the laughter of a family she'd never met. She imagined her mother running through tall grass, barefoot, chasing fireflies before life pulled her away from it all. Grace wiped her eyes and whispered, "If it's really ours, Mama, I'll find it. I'll bring it back." Inside, the Harpers argued about the electric bill again. Grace barely heard them. Her mind was already somewhere else, in a land that waited silent, but alive with her name written across it. The next morning, she packed a small backpack, her dog-eared copy of The Secret Garden, a half-empty bottle of water, a peanut butter sandwich, and the inheritance letter folded neatly on top. The road unfurled beneath the tires of Mrs. Harlow's old Buick, like a ribbon stretching between the life Grace was leaving and the one waiting ahead. The sun had barely risen, painting the sky with a pale gold glow that filtered through the windshield. Grace sat in the passenger seat, clutching her backpack, the inheritance letter resting safely inside. The hum of the engine mixed with the whisper of the radio, playing a soft gospel tune, and for a moment she felt as if the world was moving gently for her instead of against her. Mrs. Harlow hummed along as they drove past fields glistening with dew. "We'll take Route 6 all the way into Maple Hollow County," she said, eyes fixed on the road. "It's an old road, older than me, older than half the stories people tell about that place." Grace looked out the window at the rolling hills, her reflection faint in the glass. "Did my family really live there?" she asked quietly. Mrs. Harlow smiled. "Lived, loved, built, and lost. The Whitmores were known for their hands. They could make beauty out of anything, wood, metal, even stone. Your great-grandfather Elias was a craftsman. Some say he built the best clock towers in 3 counties. Grace turned to her, intrigued. "You knew him?" "Only by name," Mrs. Harlow said. "But everyone in this region knew that name." For the first time, it didn't sound like a whisper from history. It sounded real. They stopped for gas at a roadside station surrounded by misty trees. A man in his late 60s, wearing a flannel shirt and cap, stood near the pump, staring as Grace stepped out to stretch. His eyes narrowed slightly when he heard Mrs. Harlow call her name. "Whitmore," he repeated slowly, his voice gravelly. "That's a name I haven't heard in a long while." Grace froze. "You know it used to," he said. "Your folks had a farm up by Maple Hollow Ridge. Good people, but after that summer, no one went near that land again." His words hung heavy in the morning air. Why, Grace asked. The man's gaze flicked toward the mountains. Some things buried in that soil were meant to stay there. "You be careful, young lady." Before she could ask more, he turned and walked toward the station store. Grace climbed back into the car, uneasy. "He knew my name," she whispered. Mrs. Harlow looked concerned, but steady. Small towns remember, sometimes more than we'd like them to. They drove on the landscape, changing from open fields to dense forest. The trees arched overhead like a tunnel of green sunlight flickering through the branches. Grace traced her finger along the fogged-up window, spelling her last name letter by letter. Each letter felt heavier now, as if carrying the weight of something unfinished. "Mrs. Harlow," she said after a while, "why do you think no one told me about them before?" The old woman sighed. "Maybe because the people who could have didn't know how to look back without hurting. Maybe your mama wanted to protect you from something she couldn't face." Grace turned the letter over in her lap. The paper had creases from where she'd folded it too many times, but she didn't care. It was her proof, her anchor. When they reached the edge of Maple Hollow County, the sign welcoming them was so faded, the letters were barely legible. Beyond it, the world seemed quieter. The roads narrowed, lined with wildflowers and rusted fences. Every mile deeper felt like a step into memory itself. "There's a diner up ahead," Mrs. Harlow said. "We'll stop for lunch." The diner was small and smelled of coffee and old stories. Grace sat by the window while Mrs. Harlow ordered. On the wall hung photographs of local families, black and white images with names written underneath. She scanned them idly, then stopped. One photograph showed a group of people in front of a wooden barn, smiling under the summer sun. In the corner stood a young woman holding a child with tight curls and a bow in her hair. The caption read, "The Whitmore Family, 1981. Grace's breath caught. "That's her," she whispered. Mrs. Harlow leaned in. "Who my mother?" Grace pointed to the woman in the picture. She was sure of it, the shape of the jaw, the dimple near her cheek. It was her, younger and unburdened by the years that would later weigh her down. Behind the counter, the waitress noticed. "That photo's been up there for decades," she said. "Family used to own the workshop down the road. Closed after the fire," Grace asked. The waitress nodded. "Whole barn went up one night. Nobody ever rebuilt." Mrs. Harlow looked uneasy. "We should keep moving." Grace glanced at the picture one last time. Her mother's eyes seemed to follow her even as they left. The road curved upward now, the mountains rising like silent sentinels. The air turned cooler, filled with pine and the faint scent of smoke. Grace rolled down her window, letting the wind tangle her hair. The radio crackled, then went silent. "We're losing signal, Mrs." Harlow said. Grace didn't mind. The silence of the mountains felt honest. They drove for another hour until the forest opened into a wide valley. Below them lay Maple Hollow, a stretch of meadows, creeks, and scattered rooftops glinting in the sun. "There she is," Mrs. Harlow whispered. "Home." Grace's throat tightened. The word sounded fragile but real. As they descended, she noticed something strange. Every mailbox they passed looked worn, but when they reached one marked Whitmore, the paint, though chipped, still held a faint gleam, as if someone had recently touched it. "That's it," Mrs. Harlow said softly. The car rolled to a stop at the end of a gravel road. Before them stood a farmhouse, leaning slightly to one side, its windows clouded with dust and ivy creeping up the porch rails. The barn behind it stood tall, but tired, its roof half collapsed. Grace stepped out slowly, her sneakers crunching against gravel. The wind carried the faint sound of birds and the whisper of leaves brushing against wood. She ran her hand along the porch railing, the roughness grounding her. "It's beautiful," she murmured, though it looked like anything but. Mrs. Harlow smiled faintly. "It's waiting for you, that's what it is." They unpacked a small bag of groceries and lanterns from the trunk. Grace explored the front yard, her fingers brushing against wild daisies sprouting from cracks in the path. On the porch lay an old horseshoe and a tin cup, both rusted with time. She picked them up, imagining her great-grandfather setting them down decades ago. The first morning at Maple Hollow smelled of damp earth pine and a faint sweetness of wild honeysuckle drifting from somewhere behind the barn. Grace woke early, wrapped in an old quilt she had found folded in a trunk near the fireplace. The house creaked around her, as though breathing after a long sleep. Mrs. Harlow was already awake, boiling water on a portable stove she had brought for coffee. "Morning, sweetheart," she said softly. "Sleep, all right." Grace nodded, though she hadn't really slept. Every sound in the night had felt alive, the shifting wind, the hum of insects, the faint rustle of something moving through the grass outside. Now, in the light of morning, the fear had faded into curiosity. She stepped outside barefoot, the boards cool beneath her feet. The sky was washed with pale pink, the kind of quiet dawn that made her chest ache. Beyond the porch, the field stretched endlessly toward the woods, and in that stillness she felt both very small and very seen. She wandered toward the barn, passing an old oak tree that stood like a guardian beside the fence. A toppled birdhouse lay at its base, its wooden walls rotted and covered in moss. Grace knelt to pick it up, brushing away dirt until she saw something glint inside. She reached in and pulled out a small brass key, its teeth curved and carved with tiny patterns that looked like leaves. Her heart raced as she wiped the grime from it, revealing an engraving along its handle EW, the same initials from the letter and the deed. She turned it over in her palm light, catching the metal, and for a moment it felt warm, as if it had been waiting for her. "What did you find?" Mrs. Harlow called from the porch. "A key," Grace said breathlessly. "It has their initials." The old woman's eyes widened. "Elias Whitmore, your great-grandfather." Grace nodded. "It must open something." Mrs. Harlow smiled gently, but looked uneasy. "Just be careful, Grace. Old locks don't always want to be opened." Grace didn't hear her. She was already walking toward the barn. The structure loomed ahead, wood dark, with age roof sagging but still proud. The doors were chained with a thick iron lock, the kind that hadn't been made in decades. She fit the key into the lock, but it didn't turn. Too small. She tried again, pressing harder, but nothing moved. Frustrated, she slipped it into her pocket. Inside the barn, through the cracks in the wood, she could see beams of sunlight slicing across dust. Something about it called to her the way certain memories do before you even know you have them. The day passed quietly. They cleaned a few rooms, dusted shelves, and unpacked food. Grace found a faded photograph tucked into a drawer, a man standing proudly beside a massive grandfather clock, his hand resting on its carved frame. Beneath it, written in neat cursive, was Elias Whitmore, 1952. She ran her fingers over the ink, whispering his name like a spell. That evening after supper, Mrs. Harlow sat reading by the lantern while Grace explored the attic. The air up there was thick with the scent of cedar and thyme. She found boxes filled with tools, jars of nails, and scraps of blueprints showing gears and wooden mechanisms. One diagram showed a detailed sketch of a lock design identical to the one on the barn door labeled Model 2 A double key system. Grace felt a chill of excitement. 2 keys. One she already had, the other she didn't yet know. The wind outside shifted suddenly, rattling the windows. She froze. It was subtle at first, a faint metallic noise, a scraping sound from below the attic floor. Then came a thud, like something heavy shifting in the barn. She rushed down the stairs, calling Mrs. Harlow. "Did you hear that?" The old woman looked up from her book, frowning. "Probably the wind, dear." But Grace wasn't convinced. She grabbed the lantern and stepped outside, her feet crunching on the gravel path. The night had deepened, a velvet darkness draped over the hills. The barn door creaked slightly, swinging just enough to tap against its latch. Grace held up the lantern, its golden light spilling across the ground. That's when she saw them footprints, large muddy prints leading away from the barn toward the tree line. "Mrs. Harlow," she called again, her voice trembling. The old woman appeared at the doorway. "What is it?" Grace pointed. "Someone was here." Mrs. Harlow's eyes followed the prints, her expression tightening. "Get inside, Grace, but now." Grace obeyed, heart pounding. They locked the door and sat in silence for a long time, listening. The wind sighed against the windows, the house shifting on its old bones. Finally, Mrs. Harlow spoke. "This place has been empty for nearly 40 years. It could be an animal." Grace wanted to believe that, but she couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching them since they arrived. That night, sleep came in fragments. In one dream, she stood beneath the oak tree, the brass key glowing faintly in her hand while voices whispered around her, familiar and distant. She couldn't make out the words, but one phrase echoed clearly: 2 keys, 2 truths. When she woke, the dawn light was just beginning to paint the room. The key lay on her nightstand where she'd left it, but now there was something different about it. A faint residue of soil clung to its edges, though she had cleaned it the night before. She picked it up, rubbing it clean again. Mrs. Harlow was gone from her cot. Grace found her outside, tending to a small fire pit she had built behind the house. "You were right," Mrs. Harlow said, as Grace approached. "Those footprints weren't from any animal. I checked them this morning. They lead to the creek and disappear. Do you think someone's been watching?" "Maybe," she said quietly. "Or maybe they were searching for something they didn't find." Grace looked towards the barn. The morning after discovering the footprints, Grace woke to a fog that swallowed Maple Hollow whole. The air was thick and cool, and the house groaned softly under its weight, as though remembering something heavy. Mrs. Harlow was in the kitchen, humming under her breath while stirring a pot of oatmeal. Grace sat at the small table, the brass key lying between them, gleaming faintly in the dull light. "I can't stop thinking about last night," she said quietly. "Someone was out there." Mrs. Harlow nodded. "And they might come back. We'll be cautious." But Grace wasn't afraid anymore. She was curious. The mystery wrapped around this place pulled at her like a thread she couldn't stop unraveling. After breakfast, she put on her sneakers and went outside. The fog hugged the ground like smoke, making the world seem smaller. She walked toward the barn key in her pocket, the silence around her broken only by the faint drip of water from the eaves. As she approached the barn door, she saw something glinting near the corner where the old fence met the earth. Kneeling down, she brushed away the damp grass and found a wooden stick, its handle carved with intricate designs, mountains, rivers, and at the very bottom, the letters EW. Her breath caught. The craftsmanship was beautiful, the wood smooth and worn from use. When she held it, she felt a strange pull, like holding something that remembered her. Suddenly, a voice behind her broke the stillness. That belonged to a man who built with his heart. Grace spun around, startled. An elderly man stood a few feet away, wearing a faded brown coat and a hat pulled low over his gray hair. His eyes, though lined with age, were sharp and kind. "Who are you?" she asked, gripping the stick tightly. "Name's Elias Turner," he said, stepping closer. "Used to work for your great-grandfather Elias Whitmore, back when this place was alive." Grace studied him warily. "You knew him?" "Knew him well," Elias said, nodding. "Helped him build that barn. Helped him craft things that made this valley proud. Clocks, cabinets, toys, you name it. The man could carve a life out of wood." He smiled sadly. "And then one day, he was gone. Just like that. Whole family disappeared, and folks stopped coming up this road." Grace swallowed hard. "Do you know what happened to them?" Elias looked toward the barn, his expression darkening. "No one really does. Some said fire, some said debt, some whispered about treasure. But I knew Elias Whitmore. He wasn't a man who ran from anything. If he vanished, it was because someone wanted him gone." The word sent a chill down her spine. She turned the walking stick in her hands, noticing a faint line carved into the handle that hadn't been visible before. It wasn't just decoration, it was a map. A line running from the farmhouse to the barn, then dipping downward into what looked like an underground chamber. "Did my great-grandfather make this?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Elias nodded. "Aye, he made it when he was planning something important, said it was going to protect his legacy, told me there were things he wanted kept safe, even if he never lived to see them again. Safe from who Grace asked." He hesitated before answering. "From men who think history belongs only to them. The Whitmores were proud black craftsmen, built their name on honesty and hard work. That made some folks jealous, made others angry." He looked her in the eye, and it made a few dangerous. Grace's heart tightened. She thought of the old man at the gas station who'd warned her to stay away. "Someone tried to erase them," she said softly. Elias nodded slowly. "But they couldn't erase blood, and now you're here." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small metal tag attached to a chain. It was engraved with the same initials, EW, and a date, July 1987. "That was the last summer I saw him," he said. He gave me this and told me, when the wind returns to Maple Hollow, someone will come who carries our name. Give it back to her. I didn't know if he meant a daughter or a granddaughter, but I reckon he meant you. He placed the tag in her hand, and she felt its weight like a heartbeat. Why now, she whispered. Why me? Because places remember what people forget, Elias said simply. And Maple Hollow's been waiting for you. They stood in silence, the fog beginning to lift. The barn loomed behind them, its wooden walls whispering secrets. Will you help me find out what happened? Grace asked. Elias smiled faintly. I can try, but be warned, child truth has a way of changing those who seek it. Mrs. Harlow appeared at the door, calling her name. Grace, breakfast dishes are waiting. Grace turned back, but Elias was already walking away, fading into the mist like a figure from a dream. She hurried after him, but when she reached the end of the path, he was gone. Only the faint smell of sawdust lingered in the air. Back inside, she showed Mrs. Harlow the stick and the tag. The older woman's eyes widened. That man, Elias Turner. He's alive, and Grace nodded. He said he used to work for my great-grandfather. Mrs. Harlow looked shaken. I thought he passed years ago. Folks said he left after the fire. Grace turned the walking stick over again, tracing the carved map with her finger. He said my family didn't disappear, they were made to. Mrs. Harlow sat down heavily. Grace, you need to be careful. Secrets that old don't like the light. But Grace was already thinking ahead. The carved path led directly under the barn to a space that wasn't marked on the property map. If the key she'd found in the birdhouse was the first piece, maybe this map was the second. Maybe whatever her great-grandfather had hidden was still down there. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind outside rustled through the trees, sounding almost like whispers. She got up, took the lantern, and crept out to the barn again. The moonlight pooled across the ground like silver water. She held up the stick, aligning its carved map with the real barn before her. The spot it pointed to was near the back wall, where a stack of broken crates rested. The night came down heavy over Maple Hollow, a cold wind scraping through the trees like restless fingers. Grace lay awake, her heart refusing to quiet since discovering the hidden ring beneath the barn floor. The secret had weight now pulling at her like the gravity of history itself. Mrs. Harlow had fallen asleep hours ago in the room across the hall, her soft snoring muffled under the hum of the lantern. Grace stared at the ceiling, tracing invisible patterns of wood grain, each line a path that led back to the same thought: something was buried under that barn, something her great-grandfather had built, protected, and perhaps died for. When the clock on the mantel struck midnight, the air seemed to shift. The wind paused. A faint metallic sound drifted through the open window, too steady to be the trees. Grace sat up. It came again. Clink, scrape, clink. She held her breath, listening. It was coming from the barn. Sliding out of bed, she grabbed the lantern and crept to the door. The floorboards whispered under her feet. She hesitated only long enough to glance at Mrs. Harlow's door, then pushed open the front door and stepped into the cold. The night was silver, and still the moon cutting sharp edges into the fog that pooled along the fields. Her breath fogged before her every inhale loud in the silence. The sound came again, metal against wood. She moved closer, hiding behind the old oak tree beside the fence. Through the barn's cracked door, a faint light flickered. Someone was inside. Her stomach twisted as she pressed closer, peering through the gap in the boards. A man knelt beside the hidden trap door, his back turned toward her. He was tall, wearing a dark coat and gloves, a lantern set beside him, casting jagged shadows across the barn walls. His movements were methodical, deliberate. He knew what he was looking for. The ring she had uncovered yesterday was half exposed, again, dirt scattered around it. Grace's pulse roared in her ears. She tried to see his face, but the shadows swallowed it. He grunted softly, pulling something from his pocket, a folded piece of paper, and laid it on the floor beside him. When he tugged at the ring, the wooden plank creaked but didn't lift. Frustrated, he stood up, muttering under his breath. The words were faint, but she caught one: Hallberg. The name chilled her. She pressed a hand over her mouth to keep from gasping. Then his lantern flickered, and he turned sharply toward the door as though sensing her. Grace ducked back, heart hammering. She crouched low behind the tree, waiting as footsteps approached the entrance. The barn door opened wide, her hinges groaning. She saw his silhouette framed in moonlight scanning the yard. He took a few steps forward, paused, and then turned back inside. She waited until the sound of his boots faded before slipping out from her hiding spot and creeping to the barn. The lantern still burned inside, lying on its side where he had left it. She knelt by the trap door. The paper he dropped was there, half crumpled and smudged with dirt. Her fingers trembled as she unfolded it. It was a torn invoice from a company called Hallberg Antiques, stamped with a logo of a falcon clutching a key. Below it, scrawled in rushed handwriting, were the words, "Confirm Whitmore connection to K79. Grace's heart pounded. She didn't understand what K79 meant, but her family name printed on the document made her skin prickle. She read the note again and again, her mind racing. What could her great-grandfather have possessed that would make someone break into the property decades later? And why now, just when she had returned? She stuffed the paper into her pocket and turned back toward the trapdoor. The man hadn't managed to open it, but now that she was closer, she could see faint metal bolts along the edges, each one engraved with a tiny feather-like marking. Her great-grandfather's craftsmanship again. 2 keys, 2 truths. She murmured, remembering the whisper from her dream. She had 1 key from the birdhouse. The other she still had to find. Suddenly, a sound behind her froze her in place, the crunch of gravel. She spun around, but no one was there. The barn door swayed open slightly, the hinges moaning like a warning. She grabbed the lantern and backed away, eyes darting toward the tree line where the forest loomed dark and endless. Then she saw it, a faint glimmer between the trunks, like metal catching light. A person, or just her imagination. Grace misses. Harlow's voice cut through the night, urgent and frightened. Grace turned, nearly dropping the lantern. The older woman stood on the porch, her shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. "Get inside." Grace hesitated, glancing back toward the woods, but the light was gone. She ran across the yard, her shoes slipping on the damp grass. Mrs. Harlow met her halfway, gripping her arm. "You saw him, didn't you?" "Someone was here," Grace gasped. "He was in the barn. He knew about the trap door. He left this." She handed her the crumpled paper. Mrs. Harlow's face paled as she read it. "Hallberg Antiques. I've heard that name before. They deal in old relics, private collectors, auctions, sometimes things that aren't meant to be sold." She looked up sharply. "Grace, if they're interested in this place, it's not for the land. It's for what your great-grandfather hid." They locked the doors and windows, checking every latch twice. Grace sat at the table, clutching the walking stick, while Mrs. Harlow made tea with shaking hands. The house felt smaller now, as if listening. "Do you think they know I'm here?" Grace asked. "If they didn't before, they might now." "Mrs." Harlow said quietly. "People like that don't stop once they start digging." Grace's mind spun. What if what he hid wasn't just treasure? What if it was something people wanted to destroy? "Mrs." Harlow met her gaze, eyes shining with both fear and admiration. "Then you, my dear, are holding the truth that survived." Long after Mrs. Harlow went to bed, Grace sat by the window, the brass key warm in her hand. Outside, the fog was rising again, swirling around the barn like smoke. Somewhere beyond that veil, she could almost feel her great-grandfather watching, whispering across the years for her to keep going. She pulled the Hallberg note from her pocket and smoothed it out on the table. "Confirm Whitmore connection to K79. The letters burned in her mind like a code. she would find out what it meant. The storm came at dawn, rain drumming on the roof like 1,000 tiny fists. Grace sat by the window watching the mist curl through the trees, her reflection blurred by streaks of water. The night before had left her restless. The memory of the intruder's footsteps and the paper-marked Halberg Antiques refused to fade. Beside her on the table lay both the brass key from the birdhouse and the walking stick with its carved map-twin relics that had somehow survived time and greed. Mrs. Harlow had gone into town to call the sheriff, though Grace doubted the man who broke in would be found so easily. Whoever he was, he'd known where to look, and that terrified her. But beneath the fear, a stronger feeling was growing resolve. She refused to let strangers decide what her family's name meant. She stood, grabbed the lantern, and began searching the house. The room smelled of cedar and dust, filled with forgotten furniture, covered in sheets like ghosts of a past life. In the parlor, faded wallpaper peeled in long curls, and on the mantel rested a cracked photograph frame with no picture inside. Grace ran her hand across the wood, feeling the grooves worn smooth by time. Something about the emptiness of the frame unsettled her. It was as if someone had deliberately removed the image. She turned to leave, but a faint draft brushed against her neck. The window was shut. She followed the source of the cold air to the far corner, where a section of the wall seemed slightly different and newer. When she pressed her palm to it, the panel shifted with a soft click. A loose board fell away, revealing a small, leather-bound notebook wrapped in cloth. Her breath caught as she unwrapped it. The first page was fragile and yellowed, the handwriting elegant and looping. Eleanor Whitmore, 1987. Her great-grandmother. Grace sat down, heart-pounding, and began to read. He works beneath the barn again. I can hear the hammer long after dark. He says the world is changing, that we must protect the swan before they come for it. 2 keys, 2 truths. I told him secrets cannot keep us safe forever, but he only smiled and said, "They will keep her safe." Grace's hands trembled. The swan, she whispered. It wasn't a person. It was something Elias had built or hidden. Her eyes darted to the line about 2 keys, and her mind raced back to the brass key in her pocket and the dream that had repeated those same words. She turned the page, but the next sheet had been torn out, ripped clean down the spine. The missing page felt deliberate, stolen. She closed the diary carefully, her pulse quickening. The wind outside had begun to rise, howling against the windows. She looked around the parlor again, scanning for more hiding spots. The furniture had been rearranged long ago, yet one piece caught her eye, a wooden chest beneath the window. Its lid was carved with intricate patterns, though faded, and at the center was the faint outline of a bird in flight, the same symbol etched into her key. She knelt before it, wiping away the dust. "You're the same," she murmured. The chest wasn't locked, but when she opened it, it was empty except for a layer of linen and a faint smell of lavender. Disappointed, she reached inside to feel the base. Her fingers brushed against something hard. She pressed the bottom panel, and it shifted slightly with a hollow sound. Carefully, she lifted it away, revealing a small wooden object beneath a music box. The sight made her chest tighten. It was delicate, carved from oak and inlaid with mother of pearl, the same mountain pattern that adorned the walking stick. On its lid, a small silver bird sat poised mid-flight. Grace wound the crank, and a soft melody filled the room, sweet, haunting, and familiar. She closed her eyes, the tune stirring something deep in her memory, like the lullaby her mother used to hum. The song slowed, then clicked faintly, and she heard a tiny metallic snap. The bottom of the box shifted. She turned it over, heart racing, and saw that a hidden panel had opened, revealing a second brass key, smaller, thinner, but engraved with the same initials, EW. Her breath hitched. 2 keys, she whispered, 2 truths. She sat there for a long time, staring at it, unable to move. The second key gleamed softly in the lantern light, as if it had been waiting for her. When she finally stood, she looked at the diary again. Protect the swan before they come for it. What was the swan? The name stirred something familiar. She had seen it before, though she couldn't remember where. Maybe in one of her mother's old books, or on a label in a photograph she hadn't noticed. She placed both keys on the table beside each other. They were not identical, one solid one, ornate one meant for strength, the other precision. Together they felt complete, like two halves of a single thought. As she studied them, the melody from the music box played again faintly, even though she hadn't touched it. The lid quivered slightly. She stepped closer, the hairs on her arms rising. Inside the open compartment, something thin and yellowed shifted. She reached in and pulled out a folded scrap of paper, pressed flat against the wood. It was another diary page, the missing one. Her heart nearly stopped. She unfolded it with trembling fingers and began to read. If this is ever found, it means the house has been breached. The swan must never leave these walls. It is not gold they want. It is what it proves. They will come under false names, carrying letters claiming preservation. Do not trust the men of Hallberg. Hide the second key where only love remembers its song. Grace pressed her hand over her mouth, reading the words again. Her great-grandmother had known. She had hidden the key inside the music box, the very thing built to sing that remembered song. The thunder outside cracked loudly, shaking the windows. The realization came like lightning. Hallberg Antiques had been searching for this swan for decades, and her great-grandfather had created an intricate protection system to keep it safe. 2 keys, 2 guardians. The truth divided so no single person could destroy it. She ran to the window, watching the rain blur the horizon. Somewhere in the forest beyond the barn, the people from Hallberg were still searching. The storm had passed by dawn, leaving the valley wrapped in damp silence. Fog clung low to the ground, and the earth still glistened with the sheen of rain. Grace woke before sunrise, her mind clear, her decision made. On the small table beside her bed sat the 2 keys and the music box, all laid out like instruments waiting for their conductor. Mrs. Harlow was still asleep, and Grace knew she couldn't wait for anyone's permission. There were things buried under the barn that had been waiting for her, not for the sheriff, not for collectors or thieves, but for blood, her blood. She slipped on her jacket, tied her hair back, and tucked the keys into her pocket. As she stepped outside, the morning air bit at her cheeks. The world smelled of wet soil and pine. The barn loomed in the distance, its wooden boards darkened by the night's rain. The structure felt different now, not like an abandoned ruin, but a living thing watching her waiting. She crossed the yard quietly, her sneakers squelching in the mud. When she reached the barn doors, she hesitated only a second before pushing them open. They groaned but yielded, revealing the same shadowy interior where she had last seen the intruder kneeling. Her lantern still hung from the nail where she'd left it. She lit it carefully, the warm glow pushing the darkness back. Dust motes danced in the light as she made her way toward the corner where the trapdoor lay hidden beneath a thin layer of straw. Kneeling, she brushed it away until the faint ring of iron emerged again. The same delicate engravings traced the wood around it, tiny feathers so detailed they looked almost real. She set the lantern beside her and took out the keys. The first fit neatly into a heavy brass slot, the second into a smaller one hidden beneath a sliding panel. 2 keys, 2 truths, she whispered. She turned the larger one first, left, right, left, and felt something shift beneath the floor. A click like a held breath released. Then she turned the smaller key more carefully, hearing soft internal movements, the sound of gears aligning. A faint hum vibrated through the wood. When she lifted the ring, the trapdoor rose smoothly, assisted by unseen mechanics. A breath of stale, cool air rushed upward, carrying the scent of oil and time. Below her stretched a narrow stairway, descending into darkness. She raised the lantern, but its glow reached only the first few steps. Every instinct told her to be cautious, but curiosity pulled harder. She took a deep breath and began to descend. The air grew cooler, heavier with each step. The stairs ended at a solid floor, smooth concrete rather than dirt. When she reached the bottom, she turned in a slow circle, stunned. The underground space was not a cellar, it was a workshop, perfectly preserved. Wooden tables lined the walls, tools hanging neatly in rows, each one shining faintly beneath the layer of dust. Glass jars filled with tiny screws, gears, and watch parts rested on shelves. In the center stood a long workbench illuminated by a single overhead light, still connected to a battery that flickered weakly but alive. On the table sat a leather-bound notebook, its cover cracked, and beside it, a wooden chest no larger than a bread box. Her lantern's glow shimmered across the metal fixtures, casting long shadows on the walls. Grace's heart thudded as she stepped closer, running her fingers over the table's surface. Her great-grandfather's handwriting filled the open pages of the notebook, a precise and elegant script. The Imperial Swan design near completion, the mechanism delicate beyond words. If truth must be hidden, it will rest where song meets light. Grace read the line again and again. The Imperial Swan. The swan wasn't just a name, it was something he created, perhaps the very thing Hallberg Antiques had been hunting for. She flipped through the pages. Detailed sketches filled each sheet. Intricate clockwork diagrams, gemstone layouts, even mechanical notes referencing gold filigree and enameled casing. It was a masterpiece of art and engineering, like something meant for a royal collection, not a humble mountain workshop. Her great-grandfather had crafted something worth more than money. It was legacy turned to metal and song. She placed the notebook down carefully and looked at the wooden chest. Unlike the trapdoor, this lock had no visible keyhole, only inlaid panels of different woods, maple, cherry, walnut, arranged in a swirling pattern of feathers and waves. Her fingers brushed across the design, feeling faint indentations along the edges. Something about the pattern matched the lid of the music box she carried. She placed the music box on the chest and wound it slowly. As the melody filled the room, the same haunting tune that had once made her mother hum in her sleep, the panels on the chest shimmered faintly. A section of the wood slid sideways on its own, revealing a small dial beneath it. The design wasn't just ornamental, it was functional. Her great-grandfather had built a puzzle. The melody reached its final note, and with a soft chime, the dial clicked into place. She turned it carefully, and the chest unlocked with a satisfying sound. Inside lay another smaller box, its lid engraved with the same initials EW, and beneath it folded parchment sealed with wax. Grace lifted the parchment first and broke the seal. The note inside was dated August 12, 1987, written in the same elegant hand as the journal. If you are reading this, then the world has already forgotten what it took to build beauty from pain. The Imperial Swan was never meant for greed or glory, but to prove what hands like ours could make when no one believed we could. If they come again, remember value lies not in gold, but in creation. Protect it as it once protected us. Grace's eyes blurred with tears. Her great-grandfather had built the Imperial Swan as both a masterpiece and a message, a declaration of dignity in a world that had tried to erase his name. She set the letter down and opened the smaller box. Inside was a polished glass dome wrapped in cloth. Her breath caught as she uncovered it. Within the dome rested an intricate oval object of gold and silver filigree, an egg delicate and gleaming even in the dim light. Its surface was carved with feathers and miniature jewels, the craftsmanship breathtaking. She turned it gently, and at its base, a faint engraving read the Imperial Swan. She gasped softly. It was real. Not a myth, not a legend. A creation so exquisite it could only have come from a mind that refused to settle for ordinary. And beneath it all, a mechanism like the music box gears, springs, and levers shaped like feathers. It wasn't just art. It was alive. She reached out to wind it, but a sound from above froze her hand. A door creaked open, then shut again. Someone was in the barn. Her heart pounded as she covered the egg, blowing out the lantern's flame. She stood in darkness, clutching the keys tight. Footsteps sounded above, slow and measured. The intruder was back. She backed toward the shadows, the glow of moonlight seeping faintly through a narrow vent near the floor. For a long moment, the footsteps stopped. Then came the scrape of metal, the sound of the trapdoor being tested. Grace held her breath, praying the mechanisms would hold. Finally, after what felt like forever, the sound faded. The silence that followed was deeper than before. She waited several more minutes before daring to move. The scent of smoke woke her. It wasn't the sweet wood smoke of a distant hearth. It was acrid, sharp, full of panic. Grace sat up in bed, disoriented, the darkness pulsing red through the window. For a moment, she thought she was dreaming until Mrs. Harlow's voice tore through the hallway. "Grace, get up." The next breath filled her lungs with the sting of burning air. She threw on her jacket and stumbled towards the door, the floorboards hot beneath her bare feet. Outside, the night blazed. The barn, her great-grandfather's barn, was burning flames clawing through the roof, devouring the beams with a hunger that felt personal. "No," she gasped, running into the yard. The heat struck her like a wall, waves of it bending the air. Mrs. Harlow tried to grab her arm, shouting, "You can't go in there." But Grace wrenched free. "There's something down there I have to save." She sprinted across the yard, every step sinking into ash and mud. The barn doors were half-melted black smoke pouring out like breath from a dragon's throat. She covered her face with her sleeve and pushed inside. The roar of the flames swallowed everything. The crack of collapsing beams, the hiss of burning oil, the groan of wood dying. The trapdoor was still visible beneath a thin layer of debris, the metal ring glinting dully. She fell to her knees, coughing, and yanked it open. The heat below was suffocating, but the stairway remained intact. She grabbed the lantern, though it was useless now, and descended through smoke and sparks. When she reached the workshop, she nearly sobbed with relief. It was still there, untouched by the fire, above sealed in its pocket of stone and air. The imperial swan sat under its glass dome, gleaming faintly in the dimness. "You're coming with me," she whispered, wrapping the dome in her jacket and slipping it into her backpack. She stuffed the notebook, letter, and music box beside it. As she turned to climb back up, she froze the faint echo of footsteps on the stairs. Someone else was there. A man's voice drifted through the smoke, calm and cold. "You shouldn't have come back here, Grace." She recognized it instantly. It was the same voice she'd heard in the barn the night of the break-in. The Hallberg thief. She gripped the railing, eyes burning from smoke and fear. "You set the fire," she choked. "You're destroying everything my family built." Not everything, he said, his silhouette forming through the haze, just the parts that don't belong to you. He stepped closer, face illuminated by the flicker of flame from above. He was middle-aged with pale eyes that looked empty of mercy. "You have something that's been missing for a long time," he said. "Give it to me and maybe you'll walk out of here." She backed away, clutching her backpack. "You're too late. It's already gone." His expression hardened. "Don't lie." He took another step forward, and then another sound sliced through the chaos, a sharp crack followed by a voice that shook with power. "She's not alone." From the top of the stairs, another figure appeared, framed in light, Elias Turner. He held a shotgun, the barrel steady, despite the tremor in his hands. "You again," the Hallberg man growled. "I thought you were dead." "You thought wrong," Elias said. "And you've been trespassing on hollow ground," the intruder sneered. "You don't scare me, old man." "Good," Elias replied. "Then you won't flinch." He fired once, the blast echoing through the underground chamber. The man stumbled back, not hit, but startled. Grace seized the moment, bolting for the stairs. "Go!" Elias shouted. She climbed, lungs burning, backpack slamming against her back. The flames above were spreading fast beams, collapsing like dying giants. Elias followed close behind, coughing violently. "This way." he shouted, pulling her toward a side door half hidden by smoke. They burst through it into the cold night, the sky glowing orange behind them. The barn's roof gave a final groan before caving in completely, sparks shooting into the air like shattered stars. They collapsed near the fence line, both gasping for breath. Grace turned to him, voice trembling. You knew they'd come." Elias nodded weakly. "I was hoping they wouldn't, but I've been watching for weeks. Halberg never forgets unfinished business. You worked for them," she said. "Didn't you?" His eyes filled with regret. "A long time ago, before your great-grandfather hired me. I thought they were collectors of beauty. Turns out they were thieves of it. When I realized what they wanted the Imperial Swan, I tried to stop them. Your great-grandfather and I burned the first plans before they could steal them. That fire in '87. We started it to save what we couldn't hide." Grace stared at him, the pieces falling into place. "That's why you disappeared, because Halberg wanted me dead," he said, "and because Elias Whitmore asked me to protect his family if he couldn't." His voice broke. "I failed him once. I won't again." The fire behind them roared higher, painting their faces gold. "What did Halberg want the swan for?" Grace asked. Elias hesitated. Proof. Of genius, of craftsmanship, of what they could claim as theirs. They couldn't stand that a black craftsman built something finer than any European artisan alive. They tried to buy it. When he refused, they tried to take it. His gaze shifted to the barn's remains, and now they've come back to finish the theft. Grace looked down at her backpack, the weight of history pressing against her shoulders. "Then we can't stay here," Elias nodded. "No, but we can make sure it never disappears again." He helped her to her feet and they started toward the house. "Mrs." Harlow ran out to meet them, eyes wide with relief. "Thank God you're alive, Grace. What were you thinking?" Grace embraced her tightly. "Saving what matters." Behind them, the barn collapsed, fully sparks rising into the dawn like prayers. They sat on the porch as the fire died down, wrapped in blankets. Grace turned to Elias. "There's something else you should see." She pulled out the letter from her great-grandfather, the one she'd found in the workshop. Elias took it, hands trembling as he read. When he finished, he wiped his eyes. "He was right," he whispered. "It was never about gold. It was about remembrance." Grace nodded. "Then we'll remember. We'll make sure everyone does." The eastern sky began to lighten, the first colors of morning spilling across the hill. The fire smoke drifted upward, carrying with it the scent of endings and beginnings. Grace looked at the two keys still in her pocket, their surfaces warm from her touch. By morning, the fire was only smoke and silence. The barn that had stood for generations now existed only as charred bones against the gray sky. Grace sat on the porch, clutching a cup of coffee gone cold in her hands, watching the ashes drift like snowflakes across the yard. Mrs. Harlow swept quietly beside her, humming a hymn that trembled on each note. Elias stood near the fence, staring at what was left of the barn with eyes full of ghosts. "We should go into town," he finally said, voice hoarse. "Someone needs to see the swan, someone who can tell its story before Halberg writes their own." Grace looked down at her backpack resting at her feet. The Imperial Swan lay inside, wrapped in cloth, its weight steady like a heartbeat. "But if we bring it out," she said, "they'll come for it again." Elias turned the morning light, catching the lines of his face. "They already will. The difference is now we'll be ready." They packed quickly, leaving the smoldering farm behind. The drive into town was silent, except for the hum of the truck engine. The world outside seemed washed clean by the night storm, every tree dripping with light. Grace sat with the music box in her lap, winding it absently. The melody filled the truck's cabin, a haunting lullaby that somehow made her feel braver. When they reached the town square, people stared. The news of the fire had spread fast. Smoke like that didn't stay secret long. Elias parked near the library, an old brick building that looked like it had been standing since the first settlers carved the roads. Inside, the air was cool, and smelled of paper and rain. The local historian, Dr. Leonard Harper, met them in the reading room. He was a tall black man in his 60s, with glasses that magnified his thoughtful eyes. "Elias Turner," he said, shaking his hand. "I never thought I'd see you walk through that door again." Elias smiled faintly. "I didn't either, but we've got something to show you, Leonard, something that belongs to all of us." Grace placed the wrapped bundle on the table and peeled back the cloth. The imperial swan gleamed beneath the overhead light, golden feathers catching the sun through the window. Dr. Harper's eyes widened. "Good Lord," he whispered, reaching out, but stopping short. "This is the Whitmore piece. I've read about it in fragments, letters, rumors. Everyone thought it was lost." Grace nodded. "My great-grandfather built it." Dr. Harper leaned closer, studying the filigree and mechanism. "It's not just art. This was engineering decades ahead of its time." He turned the swan over gently, inspecting its base. "Wait," he murmured. "Do you see this? There's a seam here barely visible." He pressed it lightly, and a panel slid open with a soft click. Inside was a tiny mirrored surface, engraved so finely it looked like thread. He held it up to the light, squinting. "There's writing on this." He fetched a magnifying lens and gasped as the words came into focus. "It's a message," he said. "A dedication from Elias Whitmore himself." Grace leaned closer, heart pounding. The historian read aloud slowly. "For every hand that built in silence, for every name struck from the record, let this creation stand as proof that beauty and genius are not bound by the color of skin. Let the world remember the craftsman, not the collector." The room was silent. Grace's eyes filled with tears. "He wrote that," she whispered. "He built all of this to speak after he was gone." Elias swallowed hard, and they tried to bury his voice. Dr. Harper looked at them both, his voice trembling. "This isn't just a masterpiece. It's testimony. If this reaches the public, it changes everything we know about American design history." Grace nodded slowly. "Then we make sure it does." But before they could plan their next move, the library door opened. A man in a tailored suit stepped in, flanked by two others. He carried himself with the arrogance of money and the false calm of danger. "Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly. "My name is Simon Cade, representing Halberg Antiques." Grace stiffened. Elias moved protectively in front of her. "You've got some nerve walking in here," he growled. Simon smiled thinly. "Nerve, I'd call it negotiation. We're prepared to offer a significant sum for that piece, say $5 million cash, no questions asked." Grace blinked, stunned. "You want to buy what you already tried to burn, you misunderstand," Simon said, hands folded neatly. "We want to preserve it properly. The world doesn't need another sentimental relic cluttering history. It needs context, our context." "You mean your name on it instead of ours?" Elias snapped. Simon's smile vanished. "Careful, old man. There's still business to settle between you and my employers. You vanished with stolen property years ago." Grace stepped forward, voice shaking but steady. "That property was never yours. You tried to erase my family's name and you failed. You burned our home and you still failed." Simon's eyes hardened. "You can't fight us with emotion, Miss Whitmore. The courts listen to paperwork, not tears." Grace reached into her backpack and pulled out her great-grandfather's letter, the one sealed with his initials. "Then we'll fight with his words." She laid it beside the swan. "These are his designs, his signatures, his journals, all bearing the Whitmore mark. You can't steal a man's legacy twice." Dr. Harper stepped forward. "You need to leave," he said firmly. "Now, before I call the police and the press. You'll have both here in 10 minutes. Simon hesitated, jaw tight. For a moment, Grace saw something dangerous flash in his eyes, a man used to winning. But then he straightened his tie and turned toward the door. "You think this is over," he said quietly. "You've just made enemies with deep pockets." Grace met his gaze without flinching. "Good. Maybe they'll finally pay for what they took." He left without another word, his footsteps echoing like a retreat. When the door closed, Dr. Harper exhaled shakily. You just made history, Grace. She sank into the chair, exhausted but exhilarated. No, she said softly, my great-grandfather did. I just brought it home. Elias smiled through tired eyes. You did more than that. You gave him back his voice. The news traveled faster than Grace could comprehend. Within days, photographs of the imperial swan appeared across newspapers and television screens, accompanied by headlines that spoke of rediscovery, justice, and history reclaimed. For the first time in nearly half a century, the Whitmore name was spoken with reverence instead of rumor. Scholars called it the most important find. In American artisan history, art historians wept on live television, and museums across the country sent offers to exhibit the swan under its rightful name. Grace watched it all unfold from the small porch of Mrs. Harlow's house, the same porch where she had once stared at the ashes of her family's barn. The air was different now, lighter, fuller, touched by the hum of something sacred. The world had remembered, and it had chosen to listen. Elias sat beside her, wrapped in his old coat, despite the warmth of the afternoon. His cough had worsened, but his spirit seemed stronger than ever. You did it, he said quietly, a smile tugging at his tired face. You made them see what he built. Grace shook her head gently. He did that himself. I just opened the door. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the wind rustle through the trees that had survived the fire. The ground beyond the fence was sprouting again, green pushing through gray, life finding a way as it always had. A letter arrived the following morning, stamped with the seal of the National Museum of American Craftsmanship. Grace tore it open with trembling hands. It was an invitation to unveil the imperial swan at a national exhibition in Washington, D.C., an event dedicated entirely to Black artisans whose stories had been erased from the nation's archives. They wanted her to speak. She read it aloud, voice unsteady, and when she finished, Elias chuckled softly. Then it's settled, he said. Your great-grandfather's work finally gets the stage it deserves. Tears burned behind her eyes. I wish he could see it. Elias looked at her with quiet affection. He will. Every note of that music box is a heartbeat he left behind. That evening, they sat by the fire, the music box between them. Grace wound it once more, and the melody filled the room, a song of love, struggle, and triumph. Elias closed his eyes, the flickering light catching the lines of his face. Grace, he said softly, I've been meaning to tell you something. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope sealed with wax. This is for you. When I'm gone, open it. She frowned. Don't talk like that. He smiled sadly. I'm an old man. The fire took more from me than I let on. But don't worry. What matters isn't how long we stay. It's what we leave behind. She wanted to argue, but the look in his eyes silenced her. They sat together until the fire burned low, the song fading into quiet. The next morning, she found him still in his chair, the faintest smile on his face, the letter resting in his lap. Grief hit her like a wave, yet beneath it was gratitude deep and unshakable. Elias Turner had given everything he had to protect the truth, and now in her hands, that truth would live on. She buried him beneath the oak tree beside the ruins of the barn, where the soil was rich and the wind carried the scent of rain. As she stood there, the branches swayed, and for a moment, she could almost hear his voice whisper, "You're home now." Weeks later, she boarded a train bound for Washington, the imperial swan carefully secured in a protective case at her side. The rhythmic clatter of the tracks sounded like a heartbeat, steady and sure. She stared out the window as the landscape rolled by fields, forests, towns, all the places where stories like hers had been forgotten. But not anymore. When she arrived at the museum, the grandeur of it all nearly took her breath away. The main hall gleamed under golden light, filled with sculptures, paintings, and artifacts, all pieces of history long silenced, now displayed with pride. Curators greeted her warmly, and when they unveiled the imperial swan for the first time, the audience gasped. The golden feathers shimmered, the mechanical wings unfurled slowly, and the familiar melody began to play, filling the room with a song born in a small mountain workshop decades ago. Grace stood beside it, tears in her eyes, and began her speech. My great-grandfather, Elias Whitmore, built this piece, not for wealth or fame, but for truth, she said. He built it to remind the world that beauty belongs to every hand that dares to create, no matter the color of the skin it's born from. For years his name was erased, but today we write it again, not in ink, but in light. The crowd erupted in applause, some standing, some crying. Dr. Harper, who had helped her bring the artifact to the museum, nodded proudly from the front row. When the ceremony ended, she lingered in the quiet hall after the others had gone, staring at the swan as it continued to turn slowly beneath the lights. That's when she finally opened the letter Elias had left her. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key attached to a chain. The note read, "Grace, by the time you read this, I'll be with him again. The truth is, the land at Maple Hollow was never lost. It was held in trust under my name after your great-grandfather's death. I kept it hidden to protect it from Halberg's hands. It belongs to you now. Build something there that lasts, something the next generation can point to and say, we were here. Don't let the world forget again." E.T. Grace pressed the letter to her heart. She could almost hear his voice laughing, telling her to get back to work. Months later, she returned to Maple Hollow. The fields had grown wild, the air filled with birdsong. With the help of local volunteers and artisans inspired by her family's story, she rebuilt what the fire had taken. The new barn stood taller, brighter, and inside it hung photographs of Elias Whitmore, Eleanor Elias Turner, and the workshop sketches that had changed everything. Above the doorway, carved into the beam, were 5 words that would guide every visitor who entered. Beauty remembers who made it. The music box sat in the center, still playing its gentle song to anyone willing to listen. Children came on school trips, artists came to sketch, and elders came to weep quietly in the corners, whispering thanks to names they had never known but somehow always felt. As the sun set behind the hills, Grace stood on the porch of the farmhouse, looking over the valley her family had once called home. The wind brushed against her cheek, soft as a blessing. She smiled, whispering into the golden light. We're remembered now. The melody from the barn rose with the wind, carrying the tune of generations forward, echoing through time like a promise that beauty born in truth can never truly burn away. The end. Before you go, I'd love to hear what you think about this story. Which moment stayed with you the most? The discovery of the Imperial Swan Elias Turner's redemption, or Grace finally giving her family's name back to history? Let me know your thoughts and where you're watching from in the comments below. Your support keeps stories like this alive, so if this one moved, you don't forget to like the video and subscribe for more stories that remind us how truth and courage can outlive even the darkest fire.